morning. Good morning and welcome to Friday. How about that? Love Fridays. And it's Friday the 13th. If you're into that superstitious kind of thing. Dan Fagan Show, broadcasting on KOAN, KVNT. You'll have to excuse my voice. I was coughing quite a bit last night. I think.
Are you going to avoid any black cats or ladders today?
I've never understood.
Just to be safe?
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I've never understood that superstitious stuff. I like the song, Very Superstitious,
Yep.
But I don't really get how people would choose to live their lives differently because of it.
Well, you know how athletes have their
Baseball players.
routines,
Yes.
and hockey,
Famous.
even the way they wrap their stick. And
Yes, very true. Yeah, no, baseball players are famous for it. You know, baseball is a hard sport. 1/3 of the time you get to the plate, you're out. And if you can do that, you're one of the best players in the league. I mean, 333 batting average would be the would be the league champion that year. But so I see why baseball players are superstitious, because it's such a hard sport to hit a major league pitcher. And by hit them, I mean the ball that they pitch.
And imagine that they have to do it every game. At least we only have to do it every Friday the 13th. So.
That's right. And I don't understand that. And I know some golfers are the same. Wow. I can't drink my tea because it's too hot. So I don't have any beverage to sip on here, folks. You have to bear with me for a minute. But yeah, I don't understand that whole superstitious stuff. I don't get it. I mean, is it like a religion? Is it, if that's your religion, I guess, but I've never been able to quite get a grasp on who have superstitions, I suppose. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, but that's not to say that people who are people of faith, a lot of times understand why you would say that God gets mad at you if you eat meat on Fridays, or a woman has to cover her head. If these are some of the things religions teach, and a lot of the stuff just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't necessarily mean it's not right. It's just, that's just the way my mind works. Well, really big news yesterday. This is huge, folks. It's so huge, and I'm telling you, I'm trying to build a case for you. If you listen to the show at any time at all in length, you know that I want you to catch my vision for what I believe Alaska has ahead of it. And yesterday, the Obama administration took a major step toward validating the government's 2008 sale of Arctic drilling rights to Shell. And this is such a big deal. This almost guarantees, well, there's still some hurdles ahead, but it's looking really good that this summer Shell will be drilling in the Arctic. And they've already said that they planned on it if they're allowed. It's up to the Obama folks. But good on the president for allowing this to go forward. It's such a big deal. Sally Jewell, Interior Secretary, can still screw the whole thing up, and she'll be here in the state coming up soon. I don't remember the date she'll be here, but by March 25th, she'll have to make the final decision, I suppose. But it's looking really good, and that's very promising. This offshore drilling thing. I saw some of the comments on the ADN, and a lot of the leftists are on there saying, well, the state's not getting direct funding, and what good is it? Who's it going to help? Well, first of all, it's going to keep the pipeline going. And yes, we will get funding. It's going to create jobs. You remember those Democrats. Those are the things you guys are trying to kill. That's one of the big things it's going to do. It's going to employ a lot of people. So that's the main reason that it's a big deal, because a lot of people are going to go to work. It's so funny, I don't want to come across and paint with a wide brush here, but I'm pretty much convinced that Democrats are really about getting you off the workforce and into government dependency. At least as president, everything he seems to be promoting, that's the thing he's pushing for. So I don't know. Why would you not get excited about a major? And plus, we're less dependent on foreign oil. Hello. Does that matter at all? Is that even a factor? Now, talk about a national security issue. And the longer the pipeline is open and flowing, the more likely we're going to get ANWR open. We're going to find other oil around the state. And PRA, we're going to get more oil there. And I believe one day we'll drill in Western Alaska. I honestly and truthfully do. So it's a big deal, and I think we should be excited about it. I think we should really look at this as a major step forward for our state. There's billions and billions of oil out there. In the final environmental impact statement, as well as the draft released in October, the Bureau proposes 4.3 billion barrels of oil and 2.2 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. Now, keep in mind what they predicted for Prudhoe and Kaparic. We far exceeded their initial predictions. So they always come in low. So this is going to be a big deal. And, you've got 10 billion barrels in ANWR that's been predicted, so it's probably much higher than that. This pipeline is the lifeline to the state. This Trans-Alaska pipeline must keep flowing. And offshore is clearly a major part of that equation. So this is a really big deal, and good on it. All right, 569-1080 is our number, 569-1080. You can email me, danfaganshow.com, Dan Fagan Show, yeah, that's it, danfaganshow at iCloud.com. That's where you email me, danfaganshow at iCloud.com. We're streaming danfagan.us. danfagan.us. That's how you get us on the internet. And we, of course, are broadcasting on KOAN, KVNT, 95.1 FM in Anchorage, 92.5 FM in the Valley, 1080 AM in Anchorage, and then 1020 AM out in the Mat-Su Valley. I'm gonna have you cue up a little music a little bit early here, Brian, because I'm running out of juice here. 6:14 is the time. You're listening to the Dan Fagan Show. This utterly mind-blowing All right, 616, 21 in Eagle River, 21 in Anchorage, 25 in Girdwood, 19 Palmer, 19 degrees in Wasilla. This utterly mind-blowing column by a guy named Matt Walsh. It's printed in the Blaze. Small government conservatives, you should be a homeschool advocate. And the point he's making, and it's a tough one, and it's a hard-hitting one, it's a direct point, that we complain and we groan and moan about government being so big and how that it's out of control. And we sit back and say, oh, all we need is another Ronald Reagan, or we need a better president, or we need this, we need that. But what are we personally doing to shrink the size of government? And Mr. Walsh's point is, any way, shape, or form you can take government out of your life, you ought to do so, starting with not sending your kid to public schools. Now, that's a tough thing to say. A lot of people don't have a lot of money to send their kids off to private schools. And it's just not an option for them. But I know people who homeschool their kids or send them to private schools at great sacrifice. But they don't want their kids to be put into a position where they're in an indoctrination center, which is what the public school system is, in my opinion. And Mr. Walsh is saying, let's start there. Let's start with considering. Well, here's what he writes. Before we talk about principles of small government, we should have probably discussed the more fundamental principles, which is the idea that every matter should be handled by the most localized authority possible. Parents are the first authority over their kids, so they ought to take charge of educating them, or at the very least, try and refrain from ceding that responsibility to the Department of Education. All of that, in turn, is still less crucial than the fact that the education fundamentally is the pursuit and development of knowledge. And you just cannot separate factual knowledge from moral knowledge. The two are wrapped up in each other. No matter what anyone says, whoever teaches your child about the facts of existence will also be giving her answers to the deeper question, like why she exists and what it means to exist. Plato said that education is the acquisition of virtue. We, on the other hand, like to pretend that education can be one thing and virtue can be acquired entirely separate from it. Not a surprising delusion, Matt Walsh writes, considering it comes from the same society that complains about bias in the media as if there's ever been or ever could be an unbiased media. Whoever disseminates information will do it through their own partisan lens, and whoever provides education will provide it in the context of their own moral understanding of things. That is the case. It has always been the case, and it always will be the case, period. When it comes down to it, this system of education, which is built upon compulsion and conformity and run by an enormous, corrupt, bankrupt, and unaccountable government, can never be anything other than what it is and what it's always been. That is a disaster. Homeschooling is not a magic pill, he writes. There's nothing magical about it. It is deliberate and, from what I've been told, sometimes painful. But if we ever reach the point in our nation where even 25 to 30% of our kids are educated at home by their parents and orientated to life by adults who love them rather than their peers who most definitely don't love them, and teachers who might care about them but who have 300 other students to worry about, then we might see some real progress. Homeschooling, listen to this now. This is good stuff, folks. You will not read this in the Alaska Dispatch. Homeschooling is the next frontier in the conservative, libertarian, small government constitutionalist movement. It isn't new, and what I'm saying here isn't new, but it's clear that it hasn't yet occurred to everyone in this camp that they ought to be advocating for homeschooling the same way and with the same passion that they advocate for gun rights and religious freedom. Everyone else talks about getting government out of their lives. These people are doing it and making incredible sacrifices for the sake of it. I think it's time we take notice. That's Matt Walsh, who writes in The Blaze. It's easy to complain. It's easy to get mad at Mark Fagan and Barack Obama and their cohorts for exploding the size of government. And it's a tough issue. Look, I understand. I don't think Mr. Walsh's attempt here is to make you feel guilty if you send your kids to private or public schools. Maybe it is his intention. I have no idea. You know, I know some homeschooling parents, and they make great sacrifices, and I mean, I'll tell you right now, to sit home with 2, 3, 4 kids every day, all day, try to teach them. And then you have to, you know, they're still your kids at night. They're still there. They're basically with you 24/7. That's no picnic. And in many ways, our public school systems have just become big babysitting centers. Now, you know, the left takes a completely opposite view. They want more of your kids' time, and they want you to have less. Many on the left are promoting mandatory kindergarten or mandatory preschool. They want more of your kids. They want to start indoctrinating your kids as early as possible. They want to feed your kids. They want to teach your kids. They want your kids. What do you think Hillary meant when she said it takes a village? If you can separate children from their parents and in a major way reprogram them to learn new values and adopt a different worldview than the parent, then you can bring about leftism. Leftism is, to the person who's not been seduced by the spirit of leftism, it is nonsense. Unless you've been seduced by this belief system that is literally completely opposite of everything that's true. That is leftism. You look at leftism and you think, well, that's just utter nonsense. Any rational person who has not been seduced by that spirit, and you know, leftism is really a self-gratification, an elitist, I'm better than everyone. I'm not like the masses, which are stupid. I am elevated in wisdom and knowledge, and I know more than the masses. Therefore, I can be in control and take away their freedom. That's leftism. And it's a seducing kind of a thought process. It makes you feel good to think the general population are a bunch of boobs and you're elevated in wisdom and understanding. But most rational human beings understand that's not the case. So how do you convert people to leftists? Well, you got to get them young. You got to deprogram. You know, this country still is a country that has been built on Judeo-Christian values, which is life is important, hard work is important, integrity is important, self-reliance is important, love your neighbor as yourself is important. All these basic fundamental values that America has been built on. In order to become a leftist, you have to drop all of those. Right and wrong is no longer important under leftism. Equality trumps all. And it's nonsense to the person who understands it. But to a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old, you can teach equality is more important than right and wrong. And then you continually re-emphasize that belief system when they're 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. And then by the time they're in college, you can just pound it in them so hard, they're going to honestly think that equality is more important than doing what's right. And that's how you produce a nation of leftists. So these education monopoly people, they know what they're doing. They know they've got to get your kid away from you as much as they possibly can. And what Matt Walsh is simply saying here is, hey, don't let them have your kid. Don't let them walk into these indoctrination centers 7-8 hours a day for 22 years. Whatever you have to do. Let's not complain about big government when we ship our kids into the government indoctrination centers. And there are obviously some exceptions to the rule. There's many teachers out there who do not have the religion of leftism or adopt or have been seduced by the spirit of leftism. They don't teach this nonsense, but many do. Most of the curriculum does. I think it's a very hard-hitting point that Matt Walsh is making, and I think his point. There's 2 points. One, if you can at all, if it's at all possible, not to send your kids into indoctrination centers. And then two, let's do everything in our power to support homeschooling and those who do homeschool, because that's his point. Is if 30% of this nation homeschooled, we'd have a very different nation. You know, leftism is like a cult. You've got to separate the potential cult member from rational thinking people. You've got to pull them aside. You can't have a child being taught values by their parents who are not leftists and have a successful leftist prodigy. You've got to pull them from the parent. And the leftists know that as they produce leftists in droves through the public education system. It's not hard to figure out. This is not complicated stuff, folks. No, it is not. 6:28 is the time. Currently, 19 degrees outside in Anchorage. Clear skies. Foggy in Wasilla. Palmer foggy, also 19 degrees. And then Eagle River foggy. Actually, it's foggy here in Anchorage, too, driving in. At least it was for me. Girdwood, partly cloudy, 25 degrees. So we got a big show for you. Lots of big stuff to report to you this morning. Ethan Berkowitz is going to be here today. Also, Nat Hertz with the Alaska Dispatch Daily News, or whatever it's called. So stay with us. Big show, 569-1080, 6:30 time. Mike Dingman's here. He's the columnist for the Alaska Dispatch every other Wednesday.
Yep.
Mike Dingman's here. He's the All right, 6:36 in the morning, Dan Fagan show here on KOAN KVNT. Friday morning. How about that? The 13th. Congratulations. You made it to Friday. I apologize, folks. I'm having some voice problems this morning, so I'm sipping some tea and I've got some honey going. So hopefully my voice will heal here over the next few minutes. But I want to play something for you now. This is Mike Digman, who was a columnist for the Alaska Dispatch News. He was on the broadcast yesterday, and it was a fascinating conversation we had. I want to play a little bit of that for you right now. Mike Digman's here. He's the columnist for the Alaska Dispatch every other Wednesday.
Every Wednesday.
Every Wednesday.
Yeah.
It's brutal. Once a week.
It can be. Yeah.
Oh, do you ever write a column and think, man, that sucked?
No, I have written them and read it and said, oh, I should have done this, or I should have added this. I should have went this direction, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
But you got 750, 800 words.
Right.
There's only so much because I know you've written for the the Daily News when it's the ADN.
Yeah.
And you can only make so many points in that 800 words.
Right.
And, you could write a 2,000 word piece, but then it's not an opinion column anymore. So.
No, Matt Zenzi, who was the big cheese over there as far as the editorial department, he would not give me 751. I'm not kidding. I had 750 max.
Wow.
And you get 800.
Well, I get I have two very good editors, Scott Woodham, who came over with the Dispatch,
right,
and Frank Yurkovic,
who's
been at the ADN for forever,
right.
And they're really great, and they give me a lot of leeway and a lot of room to work, and they really want me to be able to make my point, so I get pretty much what I need to work with.
Right. Well,
so
I think space was probably more at a premium back in the day when I was writing for them. Now it's more. It's really
more. They've given me a whole page, the whole right side of the page before.
Yeah.
When I did the column on Louis Palau, we had a bunch of Louis Palau pictures, and I had a good size. So it depends, what they got going on. But
I don't know. It was probably about 3 months ago. I guess you sit around playing on the internet, and I went to adn.com and I typed in Fagan, and all my old columns popped up.
Yeah.
So I read about 3 or 4 of them, and I read the first 2. I thought, man, those are really good. That was a good column. And then the third one I wrote, it's terrible. I didn't even understand what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
And then the fourth one I wrote, it was worse than the third one. And I had to stop. I said, oh man, did I think I was good? And it's funny looking back.
Oh, I've done that because I have Gmail is one of the greatest things in the world because they'll let you save everything you've ever sent, right?
Right.
So when I started writing for a publication called the Alaska Standard. You might remember.
I remember very well.
And so those don't exist online anymore.
No,
but
that's true.
But I still have them in my Gmail,
Okay.
and I've gone through and read some of those. You know, and it's impressive to me to see how far I've grown as a writer since those days. Through
how long ago was that?
With the Alaska Standard was that 2008? I started writing for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did I pay you for that?
So, no, not a penny.
Why'd you do it?
I had written something on Facebook, and you said, "Hey, can I publish this?" And
I was impressed. I remember.
Yeah, and I was like, yeah, I was honored, really.
Yeah.
And I've always been a big fan of your radio show and everything. So,
thanks.
I did it because I like to write, and it opened a lot of doors for me. It got me back into politics after I'd taken some time away from it.
Right.
And it got to where I am now. So it was totally worth it.
Well, it was. I loved it, the website, because it was a part of my process of preparing for the show.
Yeah.
I'd get up early, and I felt the need to write for it every day, and then I had other people helping me write for it. And what I would do is I'd basically prepare for the show, and then write what I'm preparing on the website. And then when I got to the show at 2:00, I'd refer back to the Alaska Standard, or a lot of times I'd refer to what you wrote or whoever else. Glenn wrote, Bob Griffin wrote.
There was some great content on there. Bob Griffith and Glenn and Dave Steeren wrote a few pieces.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so it worked perfectly with my afternoon show. I'd love to go back. I've got danfagan.us, but with this morning show, it's just so hard to, so I haven't really written much on danfagan.us. We use that more for just, if you want to watch the show, go streaming, you can go to it that way. But
I have used the live stream sometimes watching you. It's pretty neat to have a webcam, the live stream, and
yeah.
then now I gotta pay attention to what I'm doing in the studio.
I know. So I don't know what's wrong with me. That just fascinates me so much. Certainly, it really means nothing in the big picture, but this. And I know you're a Walker fan, so I'm gonna ask you about Landfield and Jeff Landfield. Loves him in the Speedo,
and I'm a friend of Jeff's.
Oh, you are okay. Well, this will be good. So, for those who don't know, most do. Jeff was nominated by the governor's office to sit on a commission that was to evaluate the ethics of judges.
Yeah.
And he was nominated. He had to go through the process just abruptly 2 days ago.
Yeah, 2 days ago.
2 days ago.
I think it hit the papers yesterday. It hit the websites that evening before.
The governor's office announced that they were removing his name.
Yeah.
And they cited because the guy with was it Alex what's her
DeMarvon?
No, the gal from Alaska Public
Radio.
She's a great reporter.
Yeah.
Alexandria
Gutierrez, yeah. She's great.
Yeah, she is. She wrote in her story that because of misogynistic pictures, the ADN reported because of disrespectful pictures.
Have you seen the pictures?
I've seen some of them. I don't know that I've seen all.
There's about 3 that are really.
Well, I know the one that I saw. It was 3 women. He's in a Speedo, which is, I think most people would agree, not a good look for a man,
especially Jeff.
And there's 3 gals in there. One of them has her hands on his private parts, and then there's apparently another picture where I've not seen, but I've heard he has his hand on a woman's breast.
Yeah,
and so that was the problem. I did talk to a legislator yesterday who I shouldn't identify. And I said, what do you think about all this? He said, they've been passing these pictures around all day at the Capitol. Everybody's disgusted by them.
And, the thing is, Jeff's that kind of guy. Jeff's not, he's not hiding who he is.
Clearly.
He's a guy who is, he's 30 years old.
Right.
Single. He's single. He's a bigger guy.
Yeah.
He's got this big beard. He's an expert on Russia. When it comes to anything Russia, he is brilliant. And he just got back from the Ukraine.
Right. He did. Ukraine, really?
Yeah. Okay. He went to the Ukraine. He went deep into the Ukraine and talked to a lot of people, and he's got a lot of insights on that. But he's really a brilliant guy.
Yeah.
But he's just got this other personality that's very much, it's very fun, and it's just young and different.
Right.
And what he does is he gets these beautiful women to pose with him in pictures.
Right.
And he's wearing this. It's literally a tiny little Speedo.
Yeah.
But it's
you can wash it in a blender.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, that was a good friend Mike Dingman with the Alaska Dispatch yesterday on the broadcast, talking about our other good friend Jeff Speedo Landfill. I don't know why I got such a kick out of that story. When I don't understand things, when people here, this is one of my general faults, one of many. If you're keeping notes. I just, when I don't understand something, when something just seems so odd to me, I kind of I'm fascinated by it. And I just can't think of anything more odd than a man putting on a Speedo and walking out of his house and walk around in public like that. That just seems like just about the oddest thing anyone could do. Now, I understand that I'm set in my old ways. I'm old. I'm an old dude. I got my own, ways, and I'm not real open-minded. I'll give you all that. I'm an old fogey. I'm not that old. I'm 54, but I don't feel old. But people in their 20s would call me old. And that just fascinates me that someone would look at themselves in a Speedo, even if you're in shape, which Landfill clearly isn't. But even if you are, just say I'm going to wear this in public. It just absolutely amazes me the way the human mind works, and that's what I think is amazing about this whole story. I'm just fascinated by anybody who would decide that that's a good look, and then go out and then take pictures, 6:44, Dan Fagan Show. All right, it's 6:46, Dan Fagan Show. We got Ethan Berkowitz coming up on the broadcast today. My good friend. I really like this guy. Also, Nat Hertz, reporter extraordinaire for the Alaska Dispatch. He's the reporter covering the session. But I want to continue with our conversation yesterday with Mike Dingman. Should the governor have pulled Jeff's name from the nomination based on those pictures?
I'll say this. He's a single guy. Everything in the picture is consensual.
The guys are smiling. They're loving it.
They're smiling. They're having a great time. They think he's full of life and he's full of personality and he's not the guy you expect to see in a Speedo like that,
Right.
And but given the fact that this news was gonna, and it's not like these pictures surface. They're on his Facebook. He's very open about
they weren't
these pictures.
Discovered.
They were just shown.
Right.
And I don't blame the governor for pulling his nomination. Just because of the public persona, the public opinion that might come out of it. And when something like this happens and it's can be embarrassing, I can understand it. Now, I do think Jeff would have done a great job on the council. He's a very smart guy. He's one of those guys that if you talk to him, you wouldn't really be able to nail down his politics. He's very
true,
very middle of the road, and very he considers all his decisions very thoughtfully. Yeah. And he's a cognitive guy, and I really like that about him. No, not at all.
You're like that too. You are.
I try to be, because I try to take each individual issue and weigh it on its merits.
Right.
And Jeff's very much that kind of guy, and that's what really attracts me to him. As a friend. But I can understand why Governor Walker did what he did.
But he's in a bathing suit.
Yeah.
With consenting adults. They're all single as far as we know.
Yeah.
I don't understand what
I don't think it should be a big deal. I think Jeff ran for state senate a few years back.
Against Liesl
McGuire.
Right.
And so, there's probably some back story there that we just don't know about.
That's the thing. Because I talked to a legislator yesterday, and I asked the legislator about this. I said, did McGuire have anything to do with this? Because she sat on the committee that would have held the first hearing to evaluate him. And this legislator told me, no, these pictures have been talked about. Everybody can't believe that Walker even put Landfill up there in the first place because he's got this swinger kind of, reputation. To me, if McGuire was involved in any way, you want to talk about a reputation now.
Yeah. I really doubt. I know. Senator McGuire, and I really doubt she was involved.
I do too. Yesterday, I kind of thought she was, but after talking to this legislator, I tend to think that
I haven't gotten a chance to talk to her, but I really doubt she was involved.
Yeah.
But it's.
Have you talked to Jeff?
I talked to Jeff yesterday.
Does he think McGuire's involved?
I don't think he does. He told me there's a backstory. He said he didn't want to get into it. He kind of said he understood why what happened. He's disappointed about it. But he's ready to do whatever he can do to help as far as with the state politics, and he's kind of a gracious guy, and
he was very statesmanlike.
Yes, in a lot of ways, and and like I said, he's younger, even. I'm a younger guy, and I'm getting up there.
How old are you?
I'm getting close to 40. I'll be 40 this year.
Okay.
So, but even I at my age, I start to remember that some of these guys are a lot younger than me.
Yeah.
Some of these guys are like 24, 25, 26, and I forget how much younger than me they are. And, and it's really a generational issue. Yeah, he's 30, and he says he thinks it's a generational issue when it comes to the fact that we all carry around phones and take pictures, and a picture ain't what it used to be. You used to take a picture like of a sunset or you in front of a monument, and now we take pictures of everything. People take pictures of their food, or they take pictures of themselves in the car on the way to work, or their mocha, or whatever. And so
does the fact that this was a commission that would evaluate ethics, if it would have been like the hairstylist commission, or they have commissions for everything now, would it still, is that part of the problem, the fact that we're evaluating the ethics of judges? And here he has women groping him. That's part of the reason he might have been removed.
I think so. I think, if it was the blue ribbon panel on fast food restaurants or something, then maybe that wouldn't be such a big deal. But because it's a well-known commission, it's an important commission. They make a lot of important decisions. Assemblywoman Amy Demboski's on that commission, and she does a great job on it. And they make some really important decisions on people who have a lot of power. Yeah. And so I think that's probably a part of it. And it's ethics, and so I think that's a big part of it too. So.
Do you think Jeff did anything wrong?
No, he's a single guy. He's, I definitely wouldn't have not done what he's done, but I don't think it's wrong. It's just his personality and who he is, and when consenting adults can do whatever they want.
Because you go to most beaches outside of America, a lot of men wear Speedos.
Oh yeah,
I would never put one on.
And he's kind of that international kind of guy too, because
very much,
like I said, I don't know if I said this on the air or off there, but he's a Russian expert. He just got back from Ukraine. He's very much an Eastern European kind of guy, and if you look at him, he kind of looks Russian. Yes, he has that Russian look to him, and so he's very much open, free in that kind of European way,
right?
And it's that's just who he is, and I'm me personally, I'm kind of a quieter.
So I'm a little confused
guy,
here.
But
we got Mike Digman here with the Dispatch, and you're saying that he didn't do anything wrong, Landfield, but you also think that the governor should have removed his name.
I understand why he did, and I don't blame him.
You understand why he did?
Yeah.
So you're not saying that the governor...
If it was Governor Dingman, I don't know what I would have done. Okay. I would have talked to people and thought about it. At first blush, I'm not sure what I would have done.
Yeah.
I understand why Governor Walker did what he did. And here's the thing: as I tell a lot of people, is that there's reality is kind of a fluid thing, right?
Yes.
If me and you and whoever looks at something, we'll all have three different realities of what just happened.
Right.
And so perception is reality. And so when these pictures come out and these stories come out, and the legislators are making a big deal about it, then so this new perception becomes the reality. Yep. And so that's what Governor Walker has to deal with, and that's kind of what Jeff has to deal with, is that this perception has now become the reality.
I wonder how much pressure the governor got from legislators. Do you think it was intense, or do you think he just looked at these pictures and went, "No, we can't have this"?
I think, in all fairness to Jeff, the way I'm about to say this, I think that Jeff probably became the laughing stock of the Capitol for a day, and Governor Walker didn't want to be part of that laughing stock. And I don't blame him.
Does this reflect poorly on the governor that he picked Jeff with these pictures out there?
No, I think the reasons Jeff was recommended by Craig Fleener was because of his the things I just said.
Has anyone talked to Fleener since any of this?
I haven't talked. I don't know Craig Fleener, so I haven't talked to him.
Yeah. Now we should say also, Landfield held a fundraiser for Walker.
He was I was too. He was a host of one of the fundraisers. I was a co-host on that fundraiser as well. Yeah.
And you don't think that had anything to do with why the governor may have picked him?
No, it's Jeff knows the governor and knew him through the campaign. I know the governor. I've known him through a campaign. He certainly hasn't asked me to be on any boards or commissions. Right. I'm a state employee, and that's a lot part of it. But so I think when you start picking people for these boards commissions, you pick people and the people are the ones that are going to have their names on these fundraisers. So
fair enough. You remember Cody Downs?
Yeah, I love Cody Downs.
he's a character.
Yeah,
and this really clued me in on to how many unbelievable boards and commissions we have in the state. He called me one day. He was so excited. He had been appointed to the hairdressers board. He wasn't a hairdresser. Somebody put, I guess it was Palin. There's a board that literally it just oversees hairdressing.
That's got to be an interesting board.
I don't think so. I don't think
there's our friend Samuel Moore. Do you know Samuel Moore? He's in the around town kind of. He's the newer to the area kind of around town kind of guy. He's been involved with the Federation Community Council and stuff. And he's on the public transit advisory board, which I always think he always posts pictures of the public transit advisory board meetings, which I think has to be, the hottest ticket in town.
Yeah. So Ethan Berkowitz, we're talking to Mike Digman, columnist for the Dispatch. Ethan Berkowitz, has he got a shot?
Well, yeah. I mean, he's Ethan Berkowitz, number one. He's a brilliant guy. He's another one of those guys that gets labeled as super liberal, and he's really not. They called him Ethan Spendowitz when he was in the legislature, and really was unfair.
No. He's no less scare.
He's no less scare at all. Right. He's one of the most reasonable, more reasonable guys in the legislature. Him and Andrew Halcrow, and Andrew, another candidate for mayor. And
now this could not be good news for Halcro though.
We'll see. It really will depend on what the teachers union and the labor unions, AFL-CIO and the police and fire union do next.
Yeah. You don't think they'd pick Berkowitz over Halcro?
I don't think the police and fire union would pick anybody over Halcro.
Really?
I think the police and fire union really loves Andrew Halcro.
Why?
Because Andrew Halcro's really been out front in favor of public safety and the need for public safety. Getting down to downtown Anchorage and fixing some of the problems down there that this administration has really ignored. The bar break area, which I've titled Barmageddon. All those problems with we had the Anchor Pub and Andrew Halcro's been right out front in front of those things.
But Ethan's a total loyalist to. I remember I was going to do I did a luncheon at the Hilton once. I don't remember what it was about. And I had Ethan on my panel, and a couple of days before the luncheon, he called me and said, I'm sorry, I can't do your panel.
Oh, I remember. I was at that luncheon.
Oh, were you? Yeah. Were you on the panel?
No.
Okay.
No, I can't remember who filled in for Ethan, but it was hilarious.
Yeah. What do we do?
Might have been Dave Steeran. Might have been Dave that did that.
Yeah, and the union.
Yeah, it was great.
The union would not let Ethan go because the Hilton workers were on strike.
Yeah.
So he's loyal to the union.
Yeah. Yeah, but and those kind of unions, I understand that, but the police and fire union, they're really more about public safety before they are about their own dollars.
Yeah.
And you really nobody can tell me that they're not. These guys live, eat and breathe public safety.
That's Mike Dingman having a conversation with us yesterday. Speaking of Ethan Berkowitz, he's coming up on the broadcast shortly. Also, we're going to have Nat Hertz, reporter for the Alaska Dispatch News, who covers the legislature. He'll be calling in a little bit and giving us the very latest on what's going on. I don't know if he's calling in or coming in. He may be coming in for the weekend, or I don't know. We'll see. But either way, we'll hear from him, and he'll give us all the lowdown on what's really happening down there in Juneau. 6:58 is the time. You're listening to the Dan Fagan Show. 6 minutes past 7 o'clock, Dan Fagan Show, broadcasting on KOAN, KVNT. Good morning to you. We're glad you're here. We're streaming danfagan.us, and you can also email me, danfaganshow@icloud.com. Our number this morning, 569-1080, 569-1080. Mayoral candidate for Anchorage, Ethan Berkowitz, will be joining us shortly. Also, Nat Hertz with the Alaska Dispatch Daily News, whatever it's called. He's the legislative reporter. You know, they're just, as Sarah Palin would say, bless his heart. Poor Brian Williams. They're just scouring over everything the man's ever said. They found a new one, and it's a doozy. Apparently, Williams was speaking to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in 2008, and he took questions at the end of the speech. And an audience member asked Williams what his wow moment was of his career. And Williams said, he said, I've been so fortunate, but my wow moment was I was at the Brandenburg Gate at the Berlin Wall the night the wall came down. Well, it turns out that there was only one journalist, American journalist anchor there that night, and it was Tom Brokaw. It was not Brian Williams. So that's a pretty irrefutable misremembrance, if you will. And you know, it's tough. It's going to be tough for him because they're just going to keep digging this stuff up until he comes clean and says, "Yeah, okay, I made a bunch of this stuff up." Partly cloudy this morning with areas of dense fog with visibilities to 1/4 mile or less at times. Mostly sunny with a few lingering fog patches this afternoon. Highs in the low to mid 30s. Increasing clouds tonight. Lows in the lower to mid 20s. I just stepped outside. It feels like 80 degrees outside to me. I guess with that string of 0-degree temperatures, it just feels so good. Mostly cloudy on Saturday. Isolated rain. Did you hear that? Rain. That don't seem right. Highs in the high 30s and low 40s. That's just crazy. Mostly cloudy Saturday night with rain and snow. Lows only in the mid 30s. Sunday, sunny, isolated rain and snow. Highs in the 30s. Mostly cloudy with scattered snow and rain showers on Sunday night. So this is wacky, as Dana Carvey doing Johnny Carson would say. That is some wild and wacky stuff. Big news. This is interesting. This is I don't get our legal system. I do not get our judicial system. So there's some people who go to a New Jersey casino and they're playing cards. And it's I don't know if it's blackjack. Let's see, what is it they're playing? Oh, mini baccarat. I don't even know how to play that. I don't even know what that is. But apparently it's a card game, and there's a dealer, and you have to shuffle the cards. Now, apparently there's not a dealer. The cards are supposed to be shuffled by this machine. So anyway, the people playing at the baccarat table won 41 straight hands, and it ended up they won like millions of dollars. Because it was $1.5 million the people at this table won. And what happened was the machine that was supposed to shuffle the cards wasn't working. So you got, the same cards every time or something to that effect. And also the manufacturer who sold the cards to the casino, they're supposed to come pre-shuffled. They didn't. So the casino sued the people at the table wanting to get the money back. And guess what? Some judge said, yeah, you people need to pay that $1.5 million back. I just don't get that. It's the casino that made the mistake. It was the card man. All the people there were doing is just playing, obviously winning hands. But that's our legal system today. How could you and I understand, the casino industry probably has a lot of clout in New Jersey with Atlantic City. I've never been to Atlantic City. But actually, let's see. I think when we were kids, we no, it was where was it? Wildwood, New Jersey is where I'd been, not Atlantic City. But can you believe that these guys they're winning? They win $1.5 million, and now the government's coming after them and saying you got to give that money back to the casino because the casino's cards machine shuffler was malfunctioning. I do not understand that. I do not begin to understand that. Another big story today: President Obama's temporary deportation amnesty. Many are saying now will make it much easier for illegal immigrants to vote. And this is very concerning. And this is kind of what we knew all along. This is what he's going after. But Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach said even some motor vehicle bureaus work automatically ask customers if they want to register to vote, which some non-citizens in the past have cited as a reason for breaking the law to register. It guarantees that this will happen with these folks. In other words, there's no one's going to be watching for these people to see if they're actually registered to vote. Because when you go get your license, it's just part of the process. And so they're saying that a lot of people who are illegal, now that they're going to have driver's licenses, are going to be able to vote. And it's always been my suspicion that that's what Obama's going for. Anyway, he knows that the vast majority of illegal are immigrants. Immigrants, I should say, not the vast majority of all immigrants, but most immigrants, polls show, vote Democrat. And the more illegal immigrants we can get in here and get them to vote, the more power the Democratic Party has. And that's kind of always been my suspicion about why the Democrats do not want us to be a sovereign nation with secure borders, because it will enhance their political power. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think I am. The big story of the day for Alaska, though, is that the Obama administration, to their credit, took a major step toward validating the government's 2008 sale of Arctic drilling rights to Shell and other companies. The move by the Interior Department responds to a federal court ruling after environmental analysis underpinning that 7-year-old sale and leaves open the possibility that Shell will resume drilling in the Chukchi Sea this summer. You know, Shell has already said that they want to drill this summer if they're allowed. ADN reports, for now, nothing is certain, though the Bureau's preferred alternative, outlined in the final environmental impact statement issued Thursday, would affirm the 2008 Chukchi auction, and all the oil and gas leases sold during it. The final verdict on whether to affirm, modify, or vacate that sale rests with Interior Secretary Sally Jewell, who, by the way, is on her way up here. She's going to be coming up here soon. I don't know what days she'll be up here, but she'll issue a record of decision no sooner than March 25th, following a public comment period. So that's good news, potentially. We'll see. 569-1080, 569-1080. You are listening to the Dan Fagan Radio Show. Coming up, Ethan Berkowitz, also Nat Hertz, reporter for the Alaska Dispatch News. The time currently, 7:15. Should the governor have pulled Jeff's name from the nomination based on those pictures?
I'll say this. He's a single guy. Everything in the picture is consensual.
All right, 7:16. Dan Fagan show. Coming up, we're going to speak with Ethan Berkowitz. He'll be in the studio with us. Also, Nat Hertz of the Alaska Dispatch. And yeah, that'll be interesting to talk about Nat. He'll be giving us a lowdown of what's going on down there. Warm temperatures out there today. Highs in the 20s and 30s today, and some rain over the weekend. Rain and a mix of snow. So very different than what we've had the last couple of weeks, at least when it comes to really rigid cold weather. Hope you got a big weekend planned, lots of fun stuff lined up, and get out there, enjoy some of this warm weather. Go out and take a nice walk. Maybe I don't know. I suppose the lakes will still be frozen enough. You can, ski and ice skating is nice when it's 30. I'm not much for it when it's 5. Want to welcome education activist David Neese to the broadcast. David, good morning to you.
Good morning, Dan. How you doing today?
I'm well. I appreciate you calling in. What's on your mind today? What are you working on?
Well, last time we spoke about 2 weeks ago, the session was kind of firing up, and the ASD hadn't presented its budget, so we've had a lot of testimony on the state side, and ASD's trotted out its budget for next year. So, what would you like to talk about?
Well, you tell me. Let's talk about the ASD budget. What's your thought on it? Was it some $800 billion or something? Was it? 70
if you add in the pass-through funds that because the governor made a big bill last year that helped reduce PERS-TERS, it's $1.5 billion. But
wow,
there's $700 million pass-through funds.
So the 1.5, the rest goes to PERS and TERS.
Yeah, about $700 million goes to PERS and TERS.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, for those who don't know, and I think most do, but the PERS and TERS is the pension liability that we have as a result of a lot of these tier 1 contracts where, we're just literally
tier 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah. And like under tier 1, if you were a teacher, what was the most you could work? What was the minimum you could work until you could retire? Do you know?
Well, you're vested after, I believe, 4 years, but you don't really get much of a retirement until you're 10 years in.
But then how many years would you have to work to get full retirement? Do you remember?
Let's see. Full retirement, well, it was 2% a year, and then after 20 years, it was 2.5%. So if you put in 20 years, you got 40% of your paycheck, basically.
Yeah, so if you're 22, you're literally 42 years old, you're still going to get 40% of your paycheck the rest of your life.
Right, but that deal's gone. I mean, they've changed.
Well, it's not gone.
Well, okay.
There are people who still come under tier 1, but we changed it.
And if you look at the municipality and you look at the ASD, about a third to a half of your employees that are still working there are under one of those 3 tiers.
Right.
So they're still earning it.
Right. Exactly. I mean, the bottom line is, like they say, once you hire a government employee, you own them the rest of their lives. And people, especially if you're a female and you live to 90, you'll end up being more on your pension than you will actually have earned your salary. Correct?
Yeah, probably. That's probably fairly correct.
And so that's that extra $700 million we had to spend this year to keep up with that pension plan.
Yeah, the state is generous, and when the actuaries did the arithmetic and came up and said, we're a little short on what we got coming up across the horizon, the state said, well, that was our fault, and we'll go ahead and help pay it off, so you guys won't have to pay it off.
Yeah.
So they really haven't raised the amount the state, the city, or the school districts have to contribute. They said, we'll make up the difference. Our mistake.
Gotcha. But still, when you're talking, it doesn't really matter where the money comes from. Bottom line is, this year, money that has gone toward education was $1.5 million.
Yeah, and it was $3 billion is what the governor paid down on the $12 billion debt, I think what it was. And they're actually earning really good returns on it, so it's actually going to drop what the state pays the school district from about roughly $100 million to like $70 million pass through money next year. But when you're looking at the budget, it's all in there.
Yeah. So anything stand out to you about the actual budget?
Yeah, we have the budget. There's an issue with the number that they use because they do an estimate, And then in October, the state does a count of how many children you have sitting in class for a week in October. And earlier in the year, when they just got done with it, they said there was 47,001 children sent in the ASD. They pay for about 70,000 when you get done with formula. But the district's basing their budget on 47,700 something. And I was talking to Dave Boyle the other day, and he was a little upset because the number on the state's website had changed and how many kids were sitting in classes in October. So we don't quite know how many there are, but we do know the number's declining. And that's
so they can't track that.
Well, it's like you lose 500 kids, you should sort of know, that you lost 500 kids.
Sure.
And they added, I want to say 200 or 300 teachers. Well, they lost 1,000 some odd students, and they haven't closed any buildings. So,
wow.
Yeah. So little things in the budget stand out. The municipality yesterday exempted charter schools.
Yes.
Charter schools that are not housed in ASD buildings, and there's only one charter school housed in an ASD building.
Yeah.
Their buildings are now tax exempt, so now you have more buildings pulled off the tax rolls, which means that people that own houses will have to pay a little bit more.
Yeah, but doesn't that encourage more charter schools?
Might encourage more charter schools, especially if you got a piece of property that would benefit from having a tax break and not having to pay taxes. So
yeah.
So it's kind of interesting.
We learned yesterday from David Boyle, that in the last 10 years, the Anchorage School District budget has gone up 60%, I think he said, and yet we've lost, 6,000 students, or was it 6% of the population?
6% of the population. It's up. Okay, this is like going back to that seat time thing. They've either lost 1,000 children, or they've lost 1,500 children. We don't quite know which one it is.
It's amazing they can't track that.
Well, and it's kind of interesting. You budget for kids you may or may not have. And the thing is, the way the state pays is they say count the kids for this week in October, and we'll do your average membership for the day, and that's what we pay you on. So it behooves you to have as many children as possible in school in that 1 week in October. So anyway, in the budget, and one of the other interesting things is the board and the superintendent were unable to control their own budgets. So they put an amount out there, and then the board ran over about 70% of what they were supposed to.
70%.
Yeah, and they're instead of spending like the salary on the board is like $27,000. Last year they spent $100,000 per board member, about $700,000. The budget was the budget was like $140,000. So.
No, did they offer an explanation for that?
No, that's the beauty of the ASD budgeting policy. You can't figure out what they spend on it. It's probably law because it's contracted services or supplies, so they had a heck of a lot of supplies then. And then, but the superintendent's office did much better. They ran a little over $1 million past what their budget was.
$1 million?
Yeah, about what their budget was.
What was their overall?
No idea.
What do you mean?
No idea what they spent it on.
No, but what is their overall budget if they wouldn't be over?
The superintendent's office is roughly budgeted for about $600,000 to $650,000 a year. So
Wait.
0.5.
They get $650,000 to spend, and they spent $1,650,000.
$1.5 million, yeah.
And no one's asking.
No, nobody even. I mean, apparently you don't have to worry about that.
I know Americans
that's the people watching the chicken house.
Wow.
That's the fox guarding the hen house. It's like, okay, so we had a budget overrun of a lot, and that's okay. And so they budget for almost exactly the same amount this year as they did last year, even though they ran over a huge amount last year.
I want to welcome education activist David Neese to the broadcast. David, good morning to you.
Good morning, Dan. How you doing today?
I'm well. I appreciate you calling in. What's on your mind today? What are you working on?
Well, last time we spoke about 2 weeks ago, the session was kind of firing up, and the ASD hadn't presented its budget, so we've had a lot of testimony on the state side, and ASD's trotted out its budget for next year. So, what would you like to talk about?
Well, you tell me. Let's talk about the ASD budget. What's your thought on it? Was it some $800 billion or something? Was it?
If you add in the pass-through funds that the governor made a big bill last year that helped reduce
Yeah, that's David Dees we were speaking to earlier in the week. Here's another. I want to play another clip for you folks. You know, I think one of the biggest mistakes that Mr. Obama has made as commander-in-chief. Mistakes now. You know, when you look at Obamacare, that was a disaster, but that was him intentionally exercising his worldview to implement legislation that is disastrous. I wouldn't characterize that as a mistake. I think one of his biggest mistakes was prematurely pulling out of Iraq, and that's why we see ISIS and all that's going on right now in that region. Someone put a times that he talked about Iraq during his campaigns, and this is when he was campaigning for his second term, and then it was very interesting. The last thing he says at the end of this clip. This is a bunch of clips edited together. Listen to this.
For the first time in 9 years, there are no Americans fighting in Iraq. 4 years ago, I promised to end the war in Iraq. We did. 4 years ago, I promised to end the war in Iraq. I did. 4 years ago, I promised to end the war in Iraq, and I did. I told you we'd end the war in Iraq. We did. I said we'd end the Iraq war. We did. I told you I'd end the war in Iraq, and we did. I ended the war in Iraq as I promised. In 2008, I promised we'd end the war in Iraq. We've ended it. I was able to keep my promise and end the war in Iraq. In 2008, I promised we would end the war in Iraq, and we've ended it. The war in Iraq is over. The war in Iraq is over from ending the war in Iraq. That's why I ended the war in Iraq. For the first time in 9 years, there are no Americans fighting in Iraq.
President, do you have any second thoughts about pulling all ground troops out of Iraq?
You know what I just find interesting is the degree to which this issue keeps on coming up, as if this was my decision.
This is what you can do when the media gives you a pass. You can say things like that as though it was his decision to end the war in Iraq when he's been bragging about it endlessly. Oh, so fortunate to be a Democrat and have the media backing you up. You can just literally say anything, can't you? All right, 7:29. Ethan Berkowitz's coming up. Nat Hertz with Alaska Dispatch News also coming up. You're listening to the Dan Fagan Radio Show. Happy to welcome to the broadcast an old friend. All right, 7:35. Ethan Berkowitz's coming up. He's running for mayor. Also, Nat Hertz, who is the reporter for the Alaska Dispatch covering the Alaska legislature. Lots of questions we have for him. I apologize, folks. My throat is literally shot today, and it's very sore and tender, and I'm having difficulty talking. So I'm playing some of the clips of some of the shows that we've done recently here this week. And of course, once Ethan gets in here, I'll be able to ask him questions, and hopefully he'll do most of the talking. But let me play you a clip that we had. I think this was earlier this week. Now, Lee Hudson, who went through a real tough time in life, and he came on the show and talked to us about it. It's very interesting. Here's Lee Hudson on the show earlier this week. Happy to welcome to the broadcast an old friend, Lee Hudson. Lee, good morning to you.
Good morning, Dan.
Lee is you're a counselor?
Yes, sir.
Working with?
I am actually in private practice.
Private practice.
I partner loosely with Cornerstone Health Associates. I did all my internship work there and still partner. We refer back and forth with them, but I am in private practice. I work alongside of another guy, but I'm on my own.
You got a great radio voice.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah. Of course, they tell me I have a great face for radio.
I'm gonna touch that.
Yeah. There you go. Well, I was very very moved by something you posted on Facebook. But it was about 4 or 5 days ago.
Yeah, thanks.
Talking about being a recovering addict. You want to talk about that? Tell me about that.
Sure. From which angle?
Well, just tell me your story. Tell me what happened.
Well, generally, the fear I have in talking about it is that most people associate addiction with something you take or something you drink or something you do or some kind of behavior kind of a thing. And I was thinking about that because I knew it would come up this morning. And you know, my addiction stuff is kind of like one of the spiky balls you'd see in a video game, and it's a lot of things kind of put together. And so while there was some satellite behaviors that were not healthy for me, there was one that kind of sat in the middle of that, and that was a really compulsive, insatiable desire to get people's approval. And so I didn't realize for probably 15, most of my adult life, that I would walk into a room or be in a meeting or be in a conversation, and I was sizing everybody up. And you can handle that when you're young and strong.
Yeah.
You can handle that when there's either financial gain associated with that or some kind of status, a position. I mean, for me, it was a very, very visible leader in an organization. And we don't realize that it just starts to put drag. I didn't realize it was just putting a drag on my identity and everything about me, and it started having some really serious downstream health effects because I was overworking. I'd hold my breath, and I would get through a certain part of my work, and then I would leave, and then go isolate and try to gather enough strength to come back and do that. Which again, you can do when you're young and strong, and you're in your 20s and whatnot. But I knew I was in trouble when I'd sleep 14 hours and wake up exhausted.
Wow.
And started getting some stress related health issues that were coming alongside of that. And I grew up in central Wyoming my grandfather was a blacksmith and my father was a steel worker. So there was no such thing as mental illness or depression or anxiety. You just sucked it up and went back to work. And I lived like that for a long time. I never stopped working through all this stuff that started happening. It just caught up to me. So when I'm 40 years old, I'm zoning out for hours and hours in front of the TV, and I'm thinking this is just not me.
Yeah.
So some guys that really loved me and cared about me came around me, and they said, you're not healthy. And of course, I flipped them off and told them it was their problem. And
how did they know you weren't healthy?
Well, it was pretty obvious. These were guys I worked with.
Yeah.
They knew me pretty well, and they knew that I didn't want to be that guy. But they could see me checking out. It was pretty obvious that I wasn't healthy, and I started getting unhealthy physically. And there were whole days when I'd just go and stare at the corner and just it was pretty palpable depression and anxiety stuff. And I just never knew that's what it was.
Right.
I heard about it.
Yeah.
These really strange phobias that started to catch up with me and stuff. And it's weird for me to even talk about it because I just never, even now I think, was that really going on? But it's like, no, you're not supposed to be terrified driving across town. Right. Maybe in Anchorage.
Wow.
But
so you would get just scared just for no reason.
Just driving. I mean, driving used to terrify me.
Wow.
Which in Anchorage might be a legitimate fear. But it was something I could feel, and then these periods of isolation and whatnot. And then there were two specific things that really were, I was able to look at myself and say, I'm just not healthy.
Yeah.
I don't like baseball very much. I watched 2 baseball games back to back without getting off the couch.
Wow.
There's something's going on with me. So I went down.
You just didn't want to deal with reality. That's what you're trying to do. You didn't want to deal with your feelings and how you were,
That's a good question. I so wanted to matter where I was. I so wanted to be that guy that was a good dad.
Yeah.
Good husband. Stand-up guy at work.
Right.
I legitimately want to be that guy.
Sure.
I think for me, what caught up to me was working so hard the wrong way to be that guy and not paying attention to what was really going on inside of me, because there were some unhealthy interactions that were going on in my life. And I just didn't have enough of myself to confront that and say, this is really scary. And knowing, a good friend of mine told me probably 6 or 7 years ago, so that we don't often develop a strategy for what it looks like when it's time for us to leave a situation. And so I just grind because I didn't know, okay, this particular situation is not a thing that's good for me.
Yeah.
And so I just kept my foot to the floor.
Right.
And it was a real deep denial, but it was the inner conflict was I wanted to be a good guy. I wanted to be a guy that really honored my wife and kids, and was a guy that could be depended on and all that kind of stuff. But it doesn't work that way, especially if I'm not paying attention to what's going on inside of me.
You have to take care of yourself first.
Oh man, yeah. It's not just physical. It's an emotional thing. It's a spiritual thing. There's a lot of dimensions to it, which I didn't know. I was completely blind to all that. And so, I went to an inpatient treatment center for 2 months, and these guys started asking me questions like, "Hey, what's going on inside of you emotionally?" And I could not tell you what was happening. And it never occurred to me that I didn't know what fear really felt like to me. It'd been so long since I'd actually made a distinction between just worrying about stuff and being afraid, being legitimately afraid of what was going on around me. It was completely lost to that.
So, we go to the gym and we work out physically. The emotional health is just as important as the physical health, right?
It's the key to everything that's true about you and about me. So if a person cannot identify what's happening in themselves emotionally, they won't be able to tell you what's true about what they need, about what they really want, what they ache for, what they crave, what they dream about, what an ideal situation looks like relationally. It really is, the emotional thing is it's just a doorway to everything else that's true. So if I don't know what I'm feeling, I'm just going to offload that to some coping mechanism.
Well, I so admire your courage in talking about this, because most men, a lot of men, they don't want to even think about emotion. They don't even want to think about their emotional health. Like you say, coming from Wyoming.
Yeah.
Well, why? And we got to take a break, but when we come back, I'll ask you this. Why is it that men just seem to ignore the emotional health component of life? They don't even, I'll be fine. Just pick yourself up by your bootstraps. You'll be fine. And a lot of men walk around in horrific pain as a result of that.
Sure do. Mike
Digman's here. He's all right. I apologize, folks. I replayed a clip that we had done earlier in the week. My throat is just raw, and it's in a lot of pain. But I'm gonna pluck through now and continue the broadcast. We have our good friend Ethan Berkowitz, who is in the studio with us, and he's ready to go. He's going to do most of the talking. I'll ask you short questions,
and I'll go on for extended periods of time.
Just go on
because I've been on radio before. I know how that goes. I will fill the space.
You were my competition as of 3 days ago.
Yeah, yes, I was.
That's right.
But I'll get more of a chance to speak now that I'm on the air with you.
Excellent. Ethan Berkowitz in the studio, and we got Nat Hertz coming up later in the broadcast. Also, reporter for the Alaska Dispatch News, covered the legislature. 7:44. You listen to the Dan Fagan Radio Show. All right, here we go. 7:46, Dan Fagan Show, KOAN, KVNT. Ethan Berkowitz, former state representative, also gubernatorial candidate, right?
Checkered past.
Now you're running for mayor. Why? I'm going to ask you this.
Do you want the elevator speech? Why am I doing this?
I'm going to give you the first question your average rookie reporter would ask you. Why are you running, Mr. Berkowitz?
Thank you very much, Mr. Fagan. I appreciate that question.
Absolutely.
Look, I've lived in Anchorage for 25 years. I'm a dad here. I've got businesses here, and it matters a lot to me what the direction this community goes to. And I think if we make the right choices now, we can position ourselves to be in the right places later on. And we need to do more to make sure that Anchorage is safe, physically safe, secure, fiscally secure in terms of housing. And we got to be strong going into the future. And I can provide the kind of leadership, the stable kind of leadership that we need to get there. My experience at the state level and in business is going to serve us in very good stead. And I say that because a lot of the difficulties that are going to be coming our way are going to be coming because the state has the difficulties that it's confronting. But a lot of the opportunities I see for Anchorage come because I've been involved in the business community for, since I left public life.
You were Strategies 360. Are you still with them?
No, I'm on leave with Strategies 360.
And what is Strategies 360?
It is a firm that advises businesses primarily.
Consulting?
It's consulting firm, but it's about strategic positioning. It's business expansion, business development.
Is it public relations?
There's a public relations component to it, but there's a strategic piece to it where we would help entities chart things out. The project I was most engaged with and will probably continue to be engaged with because I have a passion for it is the development of a geothermal plant outside of Nome at Pilgrim Hot Springs, where we're going to help solve Nome's energy problem. And Nome, as you might recall, a couple of years ago, needed to be resupplied during the middle of the winter. And so if we're taking advantage of the local resource in order to make sure that Nome won't have that problem ever again.
Being a mayor, I would imagine, would be very different than being a legislator.
Extremely different.
So,
but being a talk show host was different than being a legislator.
Well, you can put a monkey in this chair, and
I don't know. My tail wasn't long enough to swing from all the branches.
but seriously, it's a very different job.
It is a very different job, and it requires different skill sets. But there's a couple of overlaps, and the overlaps come because if you have done thinking about the policies that drive how government work, if you've done thinking about how leadership is supposed to be, then it makes it easier to step into the chair. And it's really important to know where you want to go if you ever want to get there. And I have clarity about what I think Anchorage can be like, the role that Anchorage can be in terms of providing, making sure we have the infrastructure that's necessary for businesses to survive, for families to be safe, that Anchorage can be a critical piece in helping the state solve its problem and in advancing the state goals. It's interesting. I was looking at a survey the other day, and the top two concerns of the business community in Anchorage were not Anchorage-specific concerns. They're about declining production on the North Slope and also what the fate of the state's budgetary situation means to all of us.
The word on you on the streets, I had Mike Digman here yesterday. We both agreed on this one point that, and this is no disrespect to Les Guerra. I like the man very much, but you're no Les Guerra. You're not politically.
I've got far more hair than he does, for starters.
But you're not. You know what I'm saying? It's like you're not to the degree that he is to the left. You're not to that extreme.
Look,
fair.
It's a fair assessment. We have different approaches to how business works and what the role of commerce is in the economy. But Les represents an important constituency. There are people who agree with Les. I tend to come at this from a less ideological, more pragmatic perspective.
But hasn't that caused some in your party to not look at you favorably?
I was the Democratic leader in the state house for 8 years. I thank Beth Kotula for this, since she took the job at Stanford and then at the White House. Had she not continued, I would not be able to say what I'm about to say, which I am the longest serving minority leader in state history.
Yeah.
So I've carried that torch. I had a different view on how all development should proceed.
You would more reflect Tony Knowles' approach than, say, a Beth Kotula or a Les Guerra approach.
A Bill Egan approach. I would put myself in the Bill Egan camp, which is, we're a resource development state. We need to develop our resources, but we need to do it on our terms. We need to be pragmatic about it. Frankly, I'm more in a Wally Hickel ownership state mode of things, where we have an obligation as the owners to develop the resources for the benefit of all of us. And that's enshrined in the state constitution.
Didn't your wife do a research paper on the owner state concept?
She has done far more than a paper.
But okay. She's done a lot of work on it.
She's working very closely with the notion of the owner state and with the Hickel family. In fact, if I can brag just a moment about her, she was just appointed the Walter J. Hickel Professor of Entrepreneurial Activity at APU.
That's
so. You know, I told a group of folks last night, if you vote for me, the real benefit is you get merit.
Well, she is very impressive, and I've had opportunity to speak to her classes. But she was at UAA, right?
She was at UAA.
There, or she's totally APU now.
She's at APU now. She's doing some other work, and
she's
finishing up a PhD as well.
I'd like to get her on and talk more about.
She's listening, so I know she's taking notes.
Well, we had her on the TV show, and she, because I still can't get this owner state thing. I'm open to the idea, and I just don't understand it. And maybe, and I know.
Well, it's a simple concept.
Explain it to me.
The resources on state lands belong to all of us collectively,
right?
And because of that, we own the resource,
right? Collectively,
and on account of that, we have a responsibility to develop them in a common interest.
Here's where I get confused, because now that we have a governor who apparently wholeheartedly embraces the owner state, which, you know, Frank Murkowski, you wouldn't say that about. You might not even say that about Sarah Palin. I don't know what you'd say about Sarah Palin, but does that mean that we as a state prefer the government over the private sector, like Norway, when it comes to developing our resources?
No.
Okay, so it's not let's abandon the private sector and let's have most of the work done by the government sector.
No. This is, in some ways, it creates a different model. It's not a hybrid model of public and private. It's a different model of how ownership of the resources leads to development or to withholding things from development. You've got to. It requires a more active engagement in terms of resources.
Active engagement by the government.
But it's, you know, we're a government of the people, by the people, and for the people.
Right.
So government is just a layer in there. This requires the people who control the government to be engaged in order to develop the resources. It is a common. You know, we talk about the commons, and this is a commons, and in the commons, those of us as individuals who are part of those commons have a responsibility to develop and to protect, to be stewards of those resources.
So logistically, it doesn't mean that if there's an option between having the private sector do it or the government sector, you always take the government sector.
No, absolutely not.
Okay, because that's where because, you know, we had Governor Walker just recently. I'm sure you're probably aware of this. Hill Corp wanted to build an LNG facility over by Port McKenzie and take over some of the transferring of gas up to Fairbanks. Governor Walker learned about it, had his attorney general go to the RCA and say, no, that shouldn't happen. And then he goes and gets aided to talk about possibly taking the thing over itself. And that seemed to me like a clear, okay, we would rather have the government do something, even though the private sector's lined up and ready to go.
Look, I was in Juneau during all the ethical crisis, and I think those of us who served have a particular obligation to make sure that when we talk about transparency, we also make sure that there's not even the appearance of conflicts of interest or the appearance of impropriety. And what they could have done better in the administration this time was to make clear that this was a transparent process.
You're talking about the situation I just described.
The situation you just described. And it should have been done more artfully.
Okay. So I agree there, but do you also think that it's a good idea to have, when you have a private sector company ready to go, they had a signed agreement ready to go?
I don't think that the government should compete against the private sector.
So you would,
and I've seen it not just in this instance, I've seen it in the renewable energy sector as well.
Yes.
Where, you know, people who, well-meaning people, well-intentioned, who work for the state, feel that they can do something better, or they have a particular insight that the private sector doesn't have. And that's an unfair competitive advantage that the state has. It also brings in this notion of what political scientists would call captured agencies, where agencies start to do things that they shouldn't do.
Right. It's like robots coming to life.
It's rise of the machines.
talking to Ethan Berkowitz, running for mayor. I think it would be fascinating to have you as our mayor. You know, I worked for Channel 2, and I only was down there for one session covering the legislature. But you made my job so easy because you were the king of sound bites.
Well, that was the job I had at that time. You know, I understood the deadlines you were under and was able to bring things into a concise point in order to make it make sure you had less editing to do.
Right.
But it's a different responsibility as mayor.
Yeah, it is. It's a totally different thing. It would be fascinating to see you function in that capacity. I don't know if you remember the first press conference I ever attended as the Channel 2 reporter, and you were representative, and I called you senator. You remember that?
I don't recall that, but I'm sure I had a response.
You absolutely ridiculed me in front of everybody. My first day on the job. I deserved it.
Well,
I should know which body you belong to.
I was in the House. I felt like I was a man of the people and didn't want to be tainted by being called senator.
Right. Well, we're going to take a quick break, but I want to talk to you when we come back about the city, where we need to go, what you would focus on, what your priorities would be. Let's talk mayoral stuff. I want to ask you about the other candidates, how you feel about them, and we'll be back with Ethan Berkowitz running for mayor of Anchorage. Time currently 7:58. You are listening to the Dan Fagan Radio Show. All right, 806, Dan Fagan Show, KOAN, KVNT. We have Ethan Berkowitz in the studio with us. He's running for mayor. Here, let me give you my assessment of the lineup and your competition. You can comment. You can react. Amy's too young, inexperienced, not a factor, in my opinion. Maybe I shouldn't dismiss her like that, but I just don't see her as mayor. You got Andrew Hockrow, smartest guy in the room, allegedly. Not really likable. I just don't. He's the kind of guy you're impressed with him, but he just doesn't have that warm kind of likable kind of. You know what I'm talking about? Dan Coffey, kind of a cross between Tony Soprano and the Good Old Boys Club, and then there's you, smart guy. You're likable. You've been around. People know you. Even people who aren't Democrats like you. I like you. I think you got a real good shot. I think Coffey, there's just something about him. And in his defense, because of his occupation, he has put himself in positions where he has had to defend what some might say the indefensible, just because of his job. And I don't know that we should hold that against him. But he's had so many special interests that he has lined up with. And he's so intricate into the Good Old Boys special interest network that to put him in the mayor's job, is he going to dismiss all those ties through all the years and just serve the city? That could be a tough sell for him.
Look, I'm going to do this race the way I've done all my other races. I will drive in my lane and talk about the things I care about. I will say that I called those three folks or spoke with them before I jumped into the race. They're all very kind and very welcoming to getting in. And if we can wage a campaign that is substantive and civil, I think that serves the bigger public process. So folks are going to find items to nitpick on me and on them. And I hope that at the end of the day, when the decision is made, it will be made based on who has the ideas that are best for Anchorage and who they feel they have the most confidence about, someone who's most able to protect the vision of the city that they share.
Is it fair to say that when you're trying to pick a candidate to be your mayor, it's very different than what you would consider for someone who might be a legislator or even a governor? Ideology would play less of a role in the position of mayor.
Last time I went through a pothole, it didn't say this is a Republican pothole or a Democratic pothole. It just made a thunk under my tires.
The Democratic potholes would be the bigger ones.
That's the ones you throw money into, huh? Right. Okay, I get it.
So it's more of getting the job done.
It's a question of getting the job done, and it's a question of listening to people. And I've always believed that when you have disagreements, put them out on the table, because I'm willing to be persuaded if someone has a better idea. And I think that when folks come to the table, and if I can persuade them to the better, if somehow between the two of us we come up with a way forward, that's also great. Or if we have to agree to disagree, then at least we leave having a better understanding of who we are. And so the next time that there's an issue, we have the ability to forge some kind of progress. But too much of politics in the state has been either kicking the can down the road or what I call pendulum politics, where it swings back and forth and nothing really ever gets solved. And in a lot of ways, the situation we find ourselves in here today in Alaska in general and in Anchorage in particular are because we've postponed making the decisions that need to be made. And we just need to start making those decisions and doing what needs to get done.
When we're talking about the business community, and they play an important role, especially in the fundraising aspect of the campaign, I think that Mr. Coffey is probably the overwhelming favorite.
Well, let me disagree with that.
Okay.
I think that there are folks who will support him, but I've been doing business activity in this city since I got here. I had my own law firm when I first got started, but I've been invested in restaurants and real estate. I've been doing some renewable energy projects and telecommunication projects. And there are different components of the business community. It's not monolithic. And there's a diversity to Anchorage. There's established businesses. There's the new economy. There are things that we need to cultivate. And so to sort of characterize the business community as this uniform entity, I think understates the diversity that we have here.
That's fair, but let's just characterize people as entrepreneurs, people who actually own business, hire people. And I know you're right. You have 3 restaurants now. You got a third one coming.
We got a third one coming up,
and your tater tots over at
Bernard Roadhouse.
It's just
I
as
wish
good
I
as
could,
anything you can get.
I think they're the kind of tater tots they'd serve in heaven if I haven't had tater tots.
And your crab omelet over at the other morning place,
Snow City Cafe.
What is it? Crab and avocado omelet?
I tend to go for the Marasialita scramble when I eat there, but yes.
So good. So good. So you know how to run a business.
Well, I'm a partner in that.
Yeah, but I'm assuming you have some input.
I have some input.
Yeah.
But the lesson that I bring from that is if you want to invest in businesses here, you got to have something that you believe in, and you need to have something where the barriers that are part and parcel of government regulation and government administration are kept to a minimum. And if you can do that, then businesses can thrive here. But it also brings home how important it is to have the kind of transportation infrastructure. You got to have good roads. You got to have the ability of product to come in easily. And we can do a much better job at that here in Anchorage.
So you're elected, your first day on the job. What's first order of business?
Wow. I haven't thought that far down the road, but the things that we need to deal with immediately are what we're going to do to deal with the base issue, because the
loss of personnel,
that loss of personnel is looming horrifically in front of us, and we need to aggressively address it and do what we can to minimize it. And that's
these cuts, the sequester cuts that are coming along. What is it? 50% of them have to be military.
It's an astounding number, and
so
the consequences to Anchorage could be huge. They could. I mean, I'm not minimizing the problems that the state budget has for us, because they're significant. We're going to see the impacts of that on public safety and education at the very least. But the loss of personnel alone and the effect that would have on the city's economy is huge. I mean, if we lose 5% of the city's population, that has a tremendous and immediate effect on how prosperity is going to look for those of us who stay.
One of the things that I think is a real problem in Anchorage is affordable housing, especially for young couples. You know, if you got a wife and 2-3 kids and you're 28 years old, you got a student loan, you can't really afford a $350,000 house.
No, and we need to do
So what do we do? Well, how do we fix that?
There's a number of things that we need to do, and you need to make sure that the land is available, that we can do things in terms of improving housing density. There's a couple of development projects that I've heard about that would expand existing facilities. So you'd go from, say, 100 units to 350 units. And the city needs to do a better job giving clarity to developers in terms of what's allowed, what's not allowed, minimizing the drag time on bringing projects to fruition.
People like Chuck Spinelli says we're out of land at the Anchorage Bowl.
Well, you know, the city of Anchorage has about $1 billion worth of land right now. And one of the things that I'm going to be doing as I get into this race is looking at that land and identifying parcels that should be returned to the private sector. I also think that, you know, there's a very interesting data point that I discovered when I was part of Governor Walker's transition.
Hold that thought.
I will hold that thought.
Continue with Ethan Berkowitz, Dan Fagan Show. All right, 816. We're talking to Ethan Berkowitz, running for mayor in Anchorage. 569-1080. We'll take calls for Ethan. We open up the phone lines. We'd love to hear from you. So we were talking about before the break the idea of housing and what we can do to make more affordable housing available here in Anchorage.
Yep.
Your thought is?
Well, we need to improve housing density. We need to improve the ability of people who are getting starter homes to get those homes. The city needs to have greater clarity in terms of what it does for permitting, and it needs to have an expedited process. You know, as someone who's done development, who's involved in real estate, when you have to keep your capital sitting on the sidelines because you're waiting for the bureaucracy to figure out how the permits are going to go.
Yeah.
If there's inconsistency between what they tell you at City Hall and what the inspectors on the ground do for you,
right?
So
you'd streamline some of that.
You need to streamline some
now,
of that because certainty it expedites investment. And the thing we need to remember here is the folks that are doing development, money's a fungible thing. People can either invest in Anchorage or they can go invest down in one of the economies in the lower 48. So we're competing for those dollars, and we need to make sure that this is as attractive a place for those dollars to come as any place.
Now, one of the reasons that young couples can't afford a home is because a significant portion of their mortgage payment goes to property taxes. What can we do about that?
Well, the property tax burden is something we need to make sure that we spread the tax load. And this is one of the reasons why I like the idea of putting some of the city-owned land back in the private sector, because what that does is expand the tax base. And if you expand the tax base, you're sharing the burden.
So how would you go about doing that? You'd literally just put the city land up on auction and let people...
Some of it is right now, but there's more that could be done. There's some other ideas that we're developing and we'll roll out during the course of the campaign.
Would you favor diversifying the tax base? Maybe a sales tax, maybe some other type of tax?
My approach towards fiscal plans, and this goes back to my time in the state, is I'm not a fan of targeted taxes. I think what you need to do is we need to have a comprehensive idea of where we're going to go and how we're going to get there. And part of the difficulty we're facing right now is the uncertainty that exists at the state level. The state right now is going through a round of cuts. And, you know, here, my experience in the state is going to be a huge asset to Anchorage.
Yes.
And also my ability as someone who understands what the state finances look like, my ability to wade into the state debate and affect changes that are less harmful to Anchorage would be. But if depending on what the state decides to do, that's going to shape the parameters, shape the contours of what Anchorage's fiscal future is going to be.
I want to ask you about crime in a minute, but let me take some phone calls for you. 569-1080 is the number. 569-1080 if you'd like to speak to mayoral candidate Ethan Berkowitz. Jerry, you're on.
Thank you for picking me up on this. Ethan Berkowitz, I really support your run for candidacy, and you touched something that I'm had a great interest in as a sales tax issue. I went to several of the meetings with the 4 meetings. I went to 2 of them that Sullivan had on. In the meetings I was at, there was a reasonable consensus that a sales tax would be something that have to be monitored. It'd have to be regulated properly. But I did find out that the Home Depot and Lowe's together ship out multiple millions of dollars of products outside of Anchorage to other entities in the state at no sales tax. Costco, both stores, each average $1 million a day in sales, many of them going to outside entities who come into Anchorage, buy their products, return to Seward or Kenai or Homer without paying any sales tax. Also, there's 6,282 entities in the city of Anchorage that are exempt from property tax. Some of those, I think, should be carefully reconsidered to see if they actually meet the qualifications of being exempt from property tax.
Well, let me let Ethan respond to some of that.
We can't afford the luxury of allowing loopholes and not pursuing to collect the monies that are owed, because folks who are playing by the rules are now bearing the burden from those who are somehow not playing by the rules. And I want to make sure that the folks that are playing by the rules aren't disadvantaged by being straight up with this. But I'm always a little skeptical of a sales tax alone. I mean, one of the reasons why Anchorage has a competitive advantage over other parts of the state is that we don't have a sales tax. And for example, when we were developing some of the modules for North Slope development, they were done here in Anchorage. Had there been a sales tax attached to them, it would have been an additional cost, and those kind of businesses would not have come here. So sales taxes tend to be labor intensive and expensive to administer, but we should make sure that we keep an open mind about where we're going to go and how we're going to get there. We're going to head to public safety, and this is a good segue for that. And I'm jumping in here because your throat is scratching.
Well, no, I want to take some calls.
Okay, calls would be better.
I'll give you time to address public safety. 569-1080. Tom, you're on with Ethan Berkowitz.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Ethan, 4th to 15th, Gamble to Ingra, has been inversely condemned for the highway-to-highway plan, even though now that plan's been put off to 2035. But nobody's going to invest money in that area because ultimately it's just going to be condemned. And therefore we have a slum where, in any given day, you can see 50 or 60 people standing around selling drugs, selling women, selling whatever. And it's just untenable. And what would you do to correct that situation?
That's a public safety issue as much as anything else. And we oftentimes spend too much time worrying about the inputs of dollars to a problem instead of the output in terms of delivering public safety. And I was concerned in the last week when I saw that the state is going to cut the number of troopers effectively, and that's going to have a ripple consequence because APD, which is already overstretched way too thin and is far understaffed, we need to find more effective ways for APD to do its job. And some of that is, I'm a big believer in the virtues of community policing. You need to have a visible, effective police department. And we just haven't been able to do that with
it's more reactionary.
Well, except that the state and the city have made that area a slum. And
how so, Tom?
Well, because of highway to highway and the statements that area is going to all be a highway someday, nobody's going to invest any money.
Well, this is part, like I said earlier, that when you have uncertainty, that's a disincentive to investment. And
right.
We need to have clarity and certainty. And there needs to be a determination. Yes, this is going to be highway to highway. No, it's not going to be. Or if it's yes, when is it going to occur? Because it's not tenable if you don't know what's going on. You look what's happened up on Government Hill right now because the state's messing around with seizing property or not seizing property.
Eminent domain.
The eminent domain issue, and that has an adverse consequence to people living in the area. They've lost stores and shops, and the city's lost tax base on account of it. So we've got to be mindful of the realities that we live under and make appropriate decisions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Appreciate that. I had Mal Tosi on this week or last week.
Good man.
He was amazing.
Yep.
I had never met him in person, but he had a real rough childhood, and you could tell he said there were a couple of people who reached out to him, men, and set him on the right path, and now that's his life. That's what he's doing. And to hear him talk about these kids in these neighborhoods where there's no role models for them, and there's no economic opportunity for them. They're going typically to a school where they don't get the type of education that you would get at Service or other schools. And his main point, because you're talking about community policing, is we need to have a relationship between the police department and the criminal element, especially young kids.
That's right. Because look, I spent a couple of years as a prosecutor. I worked on criminal justice assessment. When I was in the legislature, the whole notion of criminal justice was something I championed. You need to have an effective strategy that links prevention, policing, and prosecution. And that effective strategy is not something you can just add more police to and expect it to solve the problem. And an important part of policing is to prevent crime. And that's what community policing does. Is when you foster those kind of relationships, when you develop that sort of role model, that's incredibly helpful. The best anti-crime measure is crime prevention.
Yeah.
That's a safe community. And we can do a lot more in terms of making the streets safer if we just are a little bit, if we deploy the assets that we have in a better way. But we're also going to, at the bottom of the day, if you want to have more policing, you need more police.
Yeah. Well, the what Mal was saying is that the gang members, we know who they are.
Absolutely.
There's no reason we can't reach out to them as police and build relationships with them. They just want to be recognized, and no one's showing them the right way. It's
and these are generalities. Obviously.
It is.
But I agree. My kids are they're in school right now,
right.
And most of the folks that they go to school with, they're good kids.
Yeah.
They might have rough spots that they go through, come from tough backgrounds, but they're good kids, and they deserve every chance to succeed. And we can make this a more vibrant community, and that's also part of what I want to do as mayors. If you give kids more things to do, they'll be more productive.
Yeah. Your children are now
11 and 14. They teach me things every day.
Do they?
Every day.
You like being a dad?
I love being a dad.
You still do a lot of cross-country skiing?
Well, except for there's this problem here right now, is there's not too much snow.
Do you need snow for that?
Apparently you need snow for it.
You can't make snow, huh? Not on the trails?
Not on the coastal trail. I've always loved going out on the coastal trail. It's a great asset.
You optimistic for the future of Anchorage?
Absolutely. I mean, I moved here 25 years ago because it means something to live.
What makes you optimistic?
Because the people here are phenomenal.
They really are.
It is. We can do things. If you want to affect change, go make that change happen. There are a few places in the world where we have, as individuals, the ability to shape our community. Anchorage is one of those places. You brought up the example of Mautosi and Tom, who called earlier.
Yeah.
I know these people.
Yeah.
Right. I don't always agree with all of them and everything, but
right.
each one of them has had an impact on the shape and contours of this community.
Yeah.
That's one of the great virtues of Anchorage. That's one of the reasons it's exciting to live here.
We really do have a lot going for us here. It's a city, but yet it's still a small town.
Oh,
but then we have really all the amenities of any city. Right?
I tell folks to the outside, it's like, why do you live in Anchorage? They say, because there's no insulation here. And they laugh at me. I say, no, what that means is I'm exposed to everybody all the time.
Sure.
And that adds a lot of diversity to my life. I mean, I deal with people every day who disagree with me. When I go to Costco, I'm talking to folks who are politically at the opposite end of the spectrum, but we're looking at cereal together, or I go to a basketball game. I might be sitting next to a CEO or somebody who carries a shovel for a living. It doesn't matter.
I'm not a kiss ass.
I know that.
I like the sound of Mayor Ethan Berkowitz. It's got a ring to it.
Thank you, Dan.
Great seeing you.
A pleasure to see you. Hope I make it back in on a regular basis.
We'd love to have you during the campaign. And I don't want to shake your hand because I don't want to get
you. Okay.
But I also, if there is a runoff, hopefully you'll come on and debate whoever it is that you're in the runoff with.
I'll talk to anybody, anytime, anywhere.
I know you will. Ethan Berkowitz, great seeing you.
Dan Fagan, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. 8:30, Nat Hertz with the Alaska Dispatch News is coming up next. Stay with us, folks. All right, 25 minutes ahead of 9 o'clock. Our good friend Keith Montauk, Specialty Truck and Auto. Keith is a mechanic you can trust. He's got 6 ASC certified mechanics working for him. They're the best in town. You need a trustworthy mechanic. Go see Keith Montauk, Specialty Truck and Auto. His number 349-1637. 349-1637. All right, we're happy to welcome reporter extraordinaire Nat Hertz, who covers the legislature currently for the Alaska Dispatch News. Nat, thanks for getting up and spending some time with us this morning.
Oh, I've been in the office for more than 1 hour already. You're welcome.
You a hard-working dude?
No. Just a normal working dude.
Hey, I got to ask you, because this was my favorite story of the week. And I was saying earlier in the broadcast, when someone does something that baffles me, that befuddles me, that I cannot comprehend or understand, I get fascinated with it. And how a grown man can walk out of his house and meander around in public with a Speedo on is something that my small, closed-minded brain can't even begin to comprehend. I'm not saying it's immoral. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I just don't get it.
Well, I think it worked for Mr. Jeff Landfield for a long time until he got appointed to a commission to review the conduct of state judges.
You think that was a good look for him?
Not my role to comment on whether that was a good one for him. I think if you ask some of the legislators here, and even if you asked Amy Dembowski, who was on that commission, I think they would have said they were surprised.
Surprised at the Speedo, or surprised at the nomination in the first place?
Surprised of the nomination of someone who has a picture of him in the Speedo on his Facebook page.
I was told by 2 different people that when the story broke, there were literally people passing out pictures in the Capitol. You know, it was kind of the talk of the day that day. Is that fair?
Yes.
So should the governor have pulled this nomination, in your opinion?
I don't have an opinion about that. I mean, you know, the governor can appoint who he wants to appoint, and then it's up to the legislature whether they're going to go along with that.
I apologize. I shouldn't have asked you that question. I interviewed so many people.
You're welcome to ask me. I'm just,
I don't want
to give an opinion.
Well, I know, and I should have remembered that. I apologize for that. Sometimes I forget when I'm talking to journalists and when I'm talking to regular folks. And I know you're not allowed to or because I'm sure you choose not to insert yourself into the middle of these debates. But I guess the better question would be, do you know why the governor specifically pulled the nomination?
I think that the governor, my understanding of the situation is that the governor was not aware of these images when he made the appointment, because it sounds like once the governor learned of the images, he pulled the appointment.
Yeah.
I don't know. I actually not remembering what your question was, but
just that was it. What drove the governor to change his mind? I guess the other question would be, isn't there normally a person in the governor's office who would be in charge of vetting appointees? And I suppose, would the procedure not involve at the very basic elemental level the viewing of one's Facebook page?
That's a good question. The governor does have a person, I believe, who's responsible for boards and commissions and appointees to those boards and commissions like this one.
Who is it?
I think I know who it is, but I'm not 100% sure, so I don't want to misidentify someone on the air.
I know Elizabeth Giordina used to do it for Parnell.
Yeah, and I think it's someone different now.
Right.
The thing that I think that is important for folks to keep in mind is that, you look at the number of appointments that are made and the number of boards, the number of commissions, it's in the dozens. And I don't know if folks remember, like in his last week in office, Governor Parnell appointed literally 80 or 90 some odd people to these boards and commissions. So, even if you have someone whose job is, dedicated to figuring this stuff out,
still a lot of work.
It's a lot of bandwidth that you have to have. And, I think what seemed to perplex people here was that it's not like these photos of Mr. Landfield were hidden away somewhere secret. Anyone who knows Jeff knows that he has sort of a colorful online presence, to put it mildly. So I think there were people here who were sort of scratching their heads at, certainly, even sort of as soon as the appointment was announced, there were sort of people throughout the building kind of saying that's a little bit surprising.
Have you ever worn a Speedo?
Well, I'm a cross country skier, so I have worn a lot of spandex.
Yeah, but that's different. I'm talking about like if you're going to walk out by the pool and.
I'm giving you my political answer, Dan. I've worn a lot of spandex. I don't think I've ever worn a Speedo before, but I like.
Do you own a Speedo?
No, I do own like wind briefs to wear during ski races so you don't freeze. But
that's very different.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how many. I do wonder how many people in Anchorage actually own a Speedo. It's like I can't imagine it's that. I mean, maybe swimmers.
As a general rule. This is just a very generic question, but I think you can form an opinion without compromising your journalistic integrity. As a general rule, do you find Speedos as a good look for men?
I would say I have some qualifications when it comes to the field of journalism and maybe a little bit when it comes to politics, but certainly when it comes to sartorial judgment, that is not an area I'm prepared to wade into.
So you're going to pass?
An appropriate verb. So, I'm going to pass.
Yeah.
I'm not paid to give my stylistic opinion. I mean, would I wear a Speedo to a party? Probably not, because it's Alaska and it's the winter.
Well, they have these legislative skits every year. Have you been? You haven't been here long enough to go to those yet, have they?
No, this is my first year in for the session. So.
Well, they're quite funny, and I would imagine that someone is going to be tasked with the responsibility of playing Jeff Landfield at the legislative skits this year, and I would imagine that person will be wearing a Speedo.
Who do you think that person is going to be?
That's a great question. You know who I think would be perfect for it? Mike Chenault.
I will have to relay that message.
Please let him know.
Okay.
Yeah. He may want to get maybe a little bit larger size Speedo than Jeff was wearing, but I think he'd probably look pretty good in one.
Is there such thing as, like, do they make different, like, lengths?
I think so.
Speedos?
I think so. I think, yeah, people come in different sizes, so, you gotta.
Also, where do you get them in Alaska? I mean, that's like, I guess you got the Amazon.
Well, if you're like on a swim team in high school, you've got to wear a Speedo because it makes you faster in the water. So there are purposes for them.
That's true.
I just don't think, attire would probably be one of the purposes. We're speaking with Nat Hertz. He's the very impressive reporter with the Alaska Dispatch News covering the Alaska State Legislature. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back with Nat right after this. You're listening to the Dan Fagan Radio Show. The time currently 8:44. reporter for the Alaska Dispatch News. He's covering the current legislative session, and he joins us this morning from Juneau. Do you stay there all weekend, or do you get to come back to Anchorage, or what?
I've been here. I actually drove down here in early January, and I've been here since then. I'm actually going to fly back to Anchorage for the first time tonight. So
well, good for you, man.
I'm sure there are some people really looking forward to getting stuck next to me on the airplane.
How do you like Juneau?
I like it a lot. It's when we were discussing whether or not I would do the job, I was a little bit skeptical because I really like living in Anchorage, and I'm a big cross country skier. I have friends in Anchorage. Those two things, I did not know what kind of access to those things I would find in Juneau, but it's great. The mountains, there's still snow, it's still Alaska, there's water, I can go skiing, and then there's really interesting job.
It's been raining a lot.
When I got here, it literally rained for 2 weeks without stopping. That's not like an exaggeration. And it did make me feel a little bit better that apparently they set a rainfall record for the month of January.
Yeah.
But then, at a certain point, it cleared up, and all of a sudden, it was this incredibly spectacular place with sun and steep mountains and stuff. So, and also since you're spending a large quantity of your day in the basement of the Capitol building, it's not all that bad to have it be rainy frequently.
Yeah. How has the legislature, particularly the leadership, responded to the governor's announcement that he's withdrawing his lawsuit regarding Point Thompson? Have they really given him credit for that, or did they see it as a political move? Are they still cynical? What do you see as their response?
I was just going to answer that question with a simple yes. I think the point that whole sort of tension is really interesting. And I think from my perspective, it's almost sort of more. I mean, it seems to be more of a story about the relationship between the governor and the legislative leadership than it really seems to be about what's actually happening at Point Thompson, because it just doesn't seem like there's any real question that about actually stopping the development that's going on there. And it really seems like much more of a kind of a personal thing between, the governor obviously felt like an injustice was done there in the way that development plan was set out. And I think it seemed like he was personally invested in the lawsuit that he had. And I mean, that's not me. That's not my opinion. That's demonstrated by the fact that he walked down to a legislative hearing for, the first time in 7 or 8 years that a governor had done that. And, went in to sort of defend his position. And,
right.
I think the legislative leadership, there's obviously been a huge change here since the last administration, and I think they're used to a more sort of cooperative relationship, a relationship where they feel like they're being actively consulted.
You're talking about under Parnell now.
Yep, that their feedback is sort of being incorporated and valued, and I think that they, whether or not that actually changed as far as a practice, I think certainly the way that they feel about it, I think certainly in the reaction of Mike Hawker after the governor spoke at that hearing, there's sort of a palpable sense of frustration and
well, he wanted the governor to stay and answer questions.
He did.
Yeah, yeah.
And the governor didn't. And,
right.
I think the legislative leadership is used to one kind of working relationship, and now they're getting another one, and it's taking some adjustment. And I think, the governor and the governor's, top staff, I think, I don't think they view it as sort of being disrespectful of the legislature, but I do think that they have a view about sort of separation of powers, like the governor was talking about in his press conference afterwards. And, I think it's just a question of it's a change between sort of the legislature and the governor just being on the same page and having the same agenda, and now they're not, and that's taking some adjustments for the legislative leadership who used to sort of feel like they were partners in being in charge. And I don't think there's any intent on either side here to sort of not have a collaborative relationship, but it's just that sort of the way that collaborative relationship is the way each of the sides sort of feels like that collaborative relationship should work, I think is a little bit different.
Well, it seems to me that they should cut the governor a little slack here. He did what they wanted. I know maybe he didn't sit there and take their grilling, but I don't understand why they wouldn't give him credit for that. But then on the other side, Nat, it seems like, I'm talking to Nat Hertz with the Alaska Dispatch News covering the legislature, the governor did put himself in quite a spot there during the campaign, calling this Point Thompson deal corrupt. And now, for all practical purposes, he's going to keep it. And I know he said he's going to try to pass some legislation to make sure this type of deal is not, done in the same way again. But isn't that a tough spot for him to be in, to call something corrupt and then yet?
Yeah, I think it's totally, it's a totally personal, it turned into a totally personal issue because, the settlement is paving the way for a project that the legislative leadership feel is hugely important. And, you've got the governor out there on the campaign trail really denigrating it as, not just sort of bad public policy, but actually illegal.
Right.
And that to me, that's why this sort of back and forth over Point Thompson, it seems like more or just as much of a sort of personal issue where, I can't imagine that was an easy thing for the governor to have to go into that committee, address those legislative leaders with whom he's kind of been butting heads over this Point Thompson issue for years, and say, he basically has to drop his objections and he's going to substitute his objections in a piece of legislation. But, you look at what happened to his first piece of, really substantive legislation, which was this, had to do with the Fairbanks interior energy project. And the House referred it to 4 committees, which, another reporter in a story about that, he called it the kiss of death. So,
sure.
The governor really, he kind of had to take a hit there, I think is the way that people would interpret that. And
well, let me ask you this about the governor's claim that the Parnell deal was corrupt or didn't go through the proper legal channels. Have you, as a reporter, looked into that? Is there any credibility to that claim?
I don't know enough about the issue to make a judgment there. And I mean, I think ultimately that's what the lawsuit was about was to resolve whether that claim was true. And, we're not, that's not going to go forward. So I don't think we're ever going to get an answer to that question. How about that as an answer? That's kind of a dodge, right?
Yeah, well, no, that's true. I mean, I guess that's the only way we would really ever really know the answers if it did find its way through the court system. But at this point, since the governor, I suppose, thinks it's not corrupt anymore, maybe he still does, but it's not worth the time and the energy to fight it. That's an interesting dynamic with this whole thing. How do you think Walker is enjoying being governor? Does he seem to be getting, because I can imagine, because he doesn't strike me as a very mean guy. He seems like a very nice man who's just, he just does. He just seems calm and nice, and he doesn't seem like the type of guy who would get into a war or a battle with people. How do you think he likes being in a situation where he has these legislators who are clearly not going to be overly cooperative with him?
I think it seems to me that the governor's approach so far has been very deliberate and not trying to avoid making his decisions be political or appear to be political. And, I think I'm trying not to sort of make too many judgments here. I think it's interesting the way that he has sort of developed the back and forth with the legislature and the relationship there. I mean, I think he is so far he appears to me to be using the levers that he has as the executive to push the policies that he thinks are best for the state, and he's kind of content. He seems to be kind of content to sort of push those over to the legislative branch and let them work on it. I don't know that that's a very insightful answer.
No, it makes sense. Yeah, I would agree with that. He doesn't. I think he's got a very good temperament for being governor. He doesn't seem to. Sarah Palin was the complete opposite. She had the worst temperament for being governor because every little thing that was said in any kind of opposition, she would obsess about it and go to war with those people. And it was like, she got so dragged down in the mud and the minutia of being governor that she was very ineffective. But I don't see Mr. Walker doing that.
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, certainly Governor Walker, having not come out of the legislature, he does not. It doesn't seem like he has sort of a huge well of relationships to sort of draw on to get his agenda done in the legislature.
Yeah.
And I think what kind of remains to be seen is how much he needs that to get done what he wants to get done. I mean, people say here that that Alaska's governor is literally the most powerful, has the most power out of any governor in the country.
Right.
To me, I don't know enough to be able to say, I mean, I think it's clear that, there are a lot of his ideas, things that he wants that are going to require legislative approval. And I think that'll be, kind of when the rubber hits the road a little bit more there with some of his real key initiatives, how much cooperation and collaboration.
Well, Matt, I appreciate you giving us some of your time. Have a great weekend. Have a great flight back. And thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, man. We'll talk to you later. That's Nat Hertz down in Juneau covering the legislature for the Alaska Dispatch News. We're done, folks. See you Monday morning, 6 a.m. Dan Fagan Show.